Hi, everybody, and welcome back. In this next set of videos, we're going to be looking at how to deal when you have multiple workbooks that you're trying to sort of bring together and use at the same time. So I'm going to go through some formatting features and some copy and editing features that you can use to start with, and we'll also look at how to deal with formulas as well. So in the past, most of our formulas and things have kind of stayed on the same sheet where the data is. But sometimes you may have multiple workbooks, obviously multiple sheets, we've seen that before, that you're trying to coordinate all this data for. So this section here is going to be about some tips and tricks on how to deal with that. So what you see here is the main Excel sheet for Tibetan Grill, and this is from your text. This is NPEX 5-1. So this is kind of like the main information sheet. But I also have a second workbook open, which I will show you. It's a little hard because I am going to have to kind of share back and forth, so kind of bear with me here. So you should be seeing the other worksheet at this point now. Very similar looking, right? Because it's for the same company, so a lot of the formatting is all going to be the same. But if you look at the bottom, this has just one worksheet in it. So what I would love to do is I'd love to bring this worksheet into my other workbook, right? Because it's kind of not silly, but you know, if it's only really need, copy it into the other workbook so that I'm not kind of going back and forth as much. So to copy one worksheet into a different workbook, so again, we're not going to copy into this one, we're going into a different workbook. You do want to have both workbooks open on your computer. They don't have to be showing on the screen at the same time, but they both need to be running. And then I'm going to just go ahead and right click. So first, so this is the sheet that I'm looking at copying in. It's called Grill 5-08. And I'm going to right click on it. And then you will see an option that says move or copy. So if you want to move the sheet and you don't need it to stay in this original workbook, you can do that, or you can copy. And I'm going to tell it which workbook I want to move it to. So it's defaulting to the workbook that I have open right now. I don't want to keep it there. I want to move it to my other workbook. So I'd like to put it in this workbook instead. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And then you'll tell Excel where you want it placed. So you can see I have other worksheets here that are labeled very similarly. So I would love it to go after number 7. So you select where you want it and you select the sheet that you want to put it before. So I want it to go before the terms and definitions sheet. So that will put it right after 07. Now, if I just click OK, it will move that sheet for me. If I want to copy, make sure you click off that box there and hit create a copy instead. And then we just go ahead and hit OK. And let me make sure that we're in the right sheet now. So I'm going to go over to the original workbook. And you will see that it actually is there at the bottom now. So there is Grill 508, and it was copied into my other workbook. So that's how we can go ahead and copy or move sheets. Just don't forget, if you want to copy, make sure you click that little box. Otherwise, it will move the sheet automatically. It will not create a copy. So just something to keep in mind so you're not wondering where your data went. All right, so there's other things that we can do as well here. And the next thing I want to talk about are viewing multiple worksheets within a window. So here, what we typically have been doing is we're just looking at kind of one worksheet at a time, and I can flip back and forth between my different worksheets and look at the information here, right? So these are for the different regions. Very similar information though. So you're noticing that they are set up very, very similarly. Same formatting, just different regions over here. So we're getting different managers and franchise locations. And of course, the numbers are changing for those regions, but they're set up very similarly. So maybe I'd like to look at more than one worksheet at the same time. And I can do that by creating new windows. So on the view key up top here, you'll see on the far right, it does say new window. And if you click new window, it will basically copy the current window that you're on. So you'll notice up here that I'm getting this -2 because they've made a second window with the same information that I was on. And I can do that as many times as I want to. So if I go back to view, I can create another window as well. So create a new window, and we get a little 3 up top. And maybe I'll create, I don't know, one more. So I have 4 different windows now, but you can't really see them yet, right? So you're really only just seeing that one. All right, so how can you view your multiple windows? So I'm gonna go back up here to view. And then on the right under new window, you see arrange all. And that will allow me to see multiple windows at the same time. And there's different formats that you can use. So tiled is one way to do it. And you can see there are those 5 windows that I had open. I opened 4 new ones. So it kind of tiles it almost like rectangles across your screen. And you can keep the windows separate, so you can move them each individually. And then you can also change whatever worksheet you're looking at. So maybe I want to have the first one on the first worksheet. Maybe I'm going to make the second one on the second worksheet. Maybe I want to make my third window on another worksheet, and so on. So I can select different worksheets and scroll through that data and kind of look at multiple pages at the same time. If I go back to view, you can change how you view it. So here we're in tiled format. And let's see. I'm just going to make one of them bigger. It's a little bit easier sometimes to work with. And then here I can try horizontal view. So for horizontal view, you're seeing everything horizontally. So you're only seeing my first screen here. Let me see. All right, so let's do this because I'm having a hard time sharing. All right, so I think now you can see it. So this is what horizontal view looks like. So all the different windows are horizontal here. And I'll go back to the tile view in a second because I'm going to guess you probably couldn't see all the windows there as well. But this is horizontal view, so you have each of the worksheets running horizontally. Personally, it's not my favorite. I think it's a little overwhelming, but that's me. If you need to go back to the view window, you can just make one of the screens big here, and I think that's the easiest thing to do. All right, let me go back to the tiled version because I don't think that was showing very well. I think you were only seeing probably part of it. Okay, good. So now you're seeing all of it if you weren't already. So this is what the tiled view looks like. And again, you can kind of click through and have, each window, you can look at a different sheet instead there. So you can kind of look at more than one sheet at a time. Another option is vertical. This one's probably my favorite one as a personal preference. So everything is set up vertically here. 5 windows is a lot to have open. So realistically, if you're actually really trying to use data, you're probably going to have maybe 2 or 3 windows open, maybe 4. But I know for me, it gets a little bit too overwhelming at that point. But here, this is that vertical view, which tends to be my favorite. And then the last one is Cascade View, which just cascades the windows. So you can kind of just click back and forth between the different windows that you're looking at. And again, that's going to be probably helpful if you need to see a bigger picture and you're not focused on maybe just a couple columns. But if you really need to see the whole workbook at once, the Cascade View is helpful there. So it really is your choice if you want to do that, right, to view more than one window at the same time. Again, for myself, I usually stick to probably 2 windows, maybe 3. But for me, beyond 2 or 3, I get personally too overwhelmed to have that much on one screen at the same time. But I do like 2 windows sometimes if I have to go kind of back and forth quickly between data or if I'm comparing data, that is helpful. And again, you guys can kind of play around with some of these. Let's go back to the view feature here. I'm going to go back to vertical view for a second. And again, if you want to, you can also select windows of active workbook so that only the active workbook is showing in case you have lots of stuff open on your computer at the same time. That could be helpful. All right, so let's go back to vertical for a second. And just to kind of note here, so as you go in, you can change the zoom on each one and you can scroll through and things like that. So you do have some options. I'm going to get rid of a couple of these because they are just so overwhelming. All right, so for me, this is a little bit nicer. I have 3 windows, not 5, so I actually can kind of actually see things here. And you can change the zoom, so you can change the zoom of your different windows if you want to. So again, you can kind of play around with this at home. We can edit this to 120%, for instance. You can see that first screen zoomed in. You can also do your zoom on the bottom here using that plus or minus effect. Again, if you don't have too many windows open, my other one was just too narrow to really see that. So I can go ahead and change the zoom feature if I find that helpful here as well. So that's a really big zoom. Let's go back down, etc. Okay, so you can play around with those features too. Now, another thing you can do is you can actually synchronize your scrolling. So for instance, right now I have it set where basically each of these windows is separate and kind of just works on its own. For me, that's usually how I like it because I'm probably looking at different things. But there are ways to synchronize your scrolling and kind of have them all move together at that same time. So one thing you want to do here is you want to do the view side-by-side feature. And again, it will ask you which workbook you want to compare with. So I'm just going to select the first one here. And actually, again, I'm going to get rid of one of these. There we go. So this looks a little bit nicer. So I'm comparing these 2 workbooks side by side here. You can see that's selected. And then once that's selected, you could have the option of synchronous scrolling. So synchronous scrolling means that if I scroll one, they both scroll together at the same time. And they go row by row together again, which is pretty nice if you're looking at the same data throughout your screen there. So you can unselect that. So you have to, so once you're in view side by side, it typically selects automatically. If you don't like it, you can unselect it and go back to just individual scrolling here. But again, if you think you're going to be using it for a bit, then that's a nice feature as well here. And again, I think it works best with those 2 windows at once, right? So for side by side, viewing 2 windows is what you're doing there, not viewing like 3, 4, 5, and so on. All right, another thing I want to show you in this video, and then we'll go to a different video for some new stuff, is to group your worksheets. So notice that our worksheets here are very similar, right? So I have worksheet 1, and then over here I have worksheet 3 selected, and they look almost identical, right? They're set up the exact same way. They're formatted the same way. The rows are the same. The columns are the same. That's actually really important. So if I have worksheets that are very similar, I may want to group them. And what grouping them does is it allows me to make changes on one worksheet that will be copied into all the grouped worksheets. So again, that's helpful because our worksheets are set up identically. So if I make a change in the first one, I know exactly how it's going to change in the other ones as well. You probably don't want to group worksheets that are drastically different because it's going to get kind of weird as that same information, the first sheet is going to keep getting copied over, or the formulas and the formatting as well. So here, I'm going to get out of this multiple view for a second. It's a little too much for me. All right, there we go. So here I'm back on the first screen. And I'm going to group my worksheets together. I actually want to group 1 through 8 because again, they're all the same pretty much. They're all identical except for the numbers are changing based on the different regions there. So I select the first one that I want to be on. And then what I can do is I can just press the Shift key, hold it down, and select Grill 8. And see how they all became bold? That means the whole thing are grouped, all of those sheets are grouped together, and you can see that word group up top here. If I don't want to group them, I can just right click on any of those tabs and hit ungroup, and they'll go back to being individual sheets. They're always individual sheets, but they won't all get formatted at the same time. You can also group sheets that are not next to each other, but instead you would use the control key. So if I hold down the control key and say I hit group 8, you'll see that they just select those 2 individually and not all the ones in between. So you can choose to group individual sheets, maybe just a couple, or you can group a whole section of them. So again, control allows you to group individual sheets like this, whereas if I use the shift key, then I can group the whole set, okay? So I'm gonna leave it on the whole set here because again, sheets basically grill 1 through 8 are all very, very similar. So I want to make changes on the first sheet and have them copied into the rest of my sheets. So let's do a couple changes here. One change, I'm going to go back to sheet 1 just as my main sheet to work on. So one change I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in a date, for instance. So maybe we'll say ending in March, or ending March 31st, 2024, for instance. So I can make that change there if I like. I can also adjust, if I want to adjust my cell there, I can do that too. I'm going to do a little bit of calculation work here. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here, and I'm going to go down to cell A43. I'm going to type in a new heading. I'm going to type in pre-tax profit. In B43, I'm going to type in the following formula. I'm going to take cell B30. I'm going to subtract it with cell B36. And I'm going to subtract cell B41. So what I'm doing there, profit, right? Think about what profit is. Profit is all that money that you take in minus all of your costs, all the money that goes out. So what I'm doing here with this formula is I'm taking my B30, so my controllable profit, and then I'm subtracting out my costs though. So I'm subtracting out my occupancy costs and then also any interest and depreciation that's happening there. And I'm left with a pre-tax profit. So I can go ahead and hit enter on that one. All right. I'm also going to do another formula. So I'm going to go into the next cell over. And I'm going to hit B43. So this value that I just got. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to divide it by B7. And I'm dividing by B7 because that is my total sales. So I'm going to get a nice percent there. And I would like to change this to the percent format. So I'm going to go back to my home screen here. And I'm going to go ahead and change that to the percent format. And I maybe would like to add in a decimal place or two. So I'm basically looking at that pre-tax profit as a percent, right? So this is the pre-tax profit. I'm dividing it by my total sales. And I'm getting a percent there of that pre-tax profit, for instance. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fix my formatting. So again, it looks pretty different than everything else here. So I'm going to copy actually this piece right here. I'm not going to kind of create a new category. I'm going to copy the formatting in cells A29 through D30. So there's different ways that you can do that, but one way is on the Home tab is to click the little paintbrush, and that is your format painter, and that will copy that formatting for you. It doesn't copy all of the work, it just copies the formatting. And then I'm going to copy that down here and select cells A42 to D43. And you'll see that format copied over. So now it looks a little bit nicer and more in line with the rest of my workbook. Now I want you to see what happened on the other sheets. The same changes were made, but with the data on those pages. So when I go to sheet 2, and let me make sure that you're actually seeing sheet 2 here. I will say I love Zoom, but sometimes it's a little hard to tell. All right. So on sheet 2, you can see that the date changed as well. We added that piece in, and you can see if I scroll down here that I have my pre-tax profit and I have my percent. Now my numbers are different because the numbers on this page are different than the last sheet, right? So it uses the data on that particular sheet, and I can go through all of them. So if I look at sheet 3, again, I can see that date came in. And if I scroll down, again, you have a different percent on this one because the data is different, and this will copy for all the sheets. So this grouping of sheets is really, really nice when your sheets are identically set up in particular. You can do it if they're not identical, but it may not work well, right? Because if your formulas are not in the right spaces or the numbers or data are in different spots, it's not going to work well. So it works well when your data is, like I said, identically set up in each sheet. And of course, you want the same changes to occur in each sheet as well. So that's when grouping is nice, because instead of doing it multiple times, I got to just do it one time. So that's pretty helpful there. You can also use other settings too, like print features and stuff. So if your sheets are grouped, then they will print the same way as well. I'm not going to go through all of that here, but you know, any of those changes that you would do there as well will carry over to all the sheets too. So it's just a nice time saver there.